I think this intermission really, I think the intermission really, we're coming out of an ice age here, so
We are.
we're thawing everything out. Um,
I'll say something.
Yay! Woohoo!
I was when you said garden, I just literally perked up, and every time I uh, I've figured this out in the last few weeks because I was outside and I have a bunch of sprouts growing inside under UV lights, and I like to get them outside as much as possible. And so a couple weeks ago, uh, took them outside in the sun, and I started repotting them in bigger pots and just really caring for them. And I just all of a sudden realized I was in a completely different space. I was so joyful. There were no cares about anything that could have bogged me down. And since then, I mean, I was like, this is it. This is my joy right now, is gardening. And the other thing I wanted to say is I was really validated as well, because last year I had a really crappy garden. I had a basil and a tomato plant, and neither of them did well, and I was so sad. And this year I decided I was going to have a big garden. I didn't know how I was going to get the setup to do my plants inside. I wanted a greenhouse, and like, how am I going to have space for all of these plants that I'm planting? And seriously, the greenhouse came to me. It's a walk-in greenhouse. The light setup came to me, like all super affordable. And I went, oh my gosh, this was my next right action. So I thought I'd share that with you guys because I found some of my joy.
Fantastic. That was brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
yeah, go ahead and take the floor.
Okay, Carrie, you've got me rolling on the gardening thing too. So this is Heather talking. I went and volunteered at a farm, and they gave me a bunch of cuttings, and I was thinking to myself, like, I have to go and work a full shift. Like, I'm not going to get these things home until tonight, and then they won't get into soil until tomorrow. Well, I didn't think they'd make it, but they all made it. And it was almost like magical that they did. Even there was one that was just a branch from a tree with nothing on it. It was just a branch with no greenery, nothing. Like, they had literally just pruned a tree and given me like an 11-inch branch. And I stuck it in dirt, and it's starting to make little sprouts out of the side and turning into a little tree. And it's totally magical. And we didn't have a garden last year, and it was so crappy. And now we're putting our garden together, and we finally got a compost bin, and it's just really good stuff.
Well, I'm really glad to hear about this because, the reflection of yourself in these activities and these spaces is just so, it's so amazing because it's literally you doing something and then nature doing something, and it's like co-conspiration. So it's just like you can feel accomplished, but then you have to give it over to the earth, and then the earth is like, oh man, I couldn't do it without you either. And so it is fun that way. Let's see here, guys. I think Marcia, you could go on. Otherwise, if somebody else has a comment or question or epitaph, feel free.
I have just one more thing. This is Heather.
Please.
When you said that about that co-creation, I had a realization a couple of years ago about part of the environmentalist type movement that's happening about just leaving nature be and just having these great big areas where like people aren't allowed to go in and be a part of it really without just stepping very, very carefully. I think there is some room for that. But I also do think that there's a really magical thing that happens when people respectfully interact with nature and actually make things happen, just like the native cultures have done for so long. And I kind of think that it's being demonized. Of course, there are plenty of people who are being irresponsible, and they need to have regulations put on them. Like, you're not allowed to spill diesel into the river. Nobody is allowed to do that. But we should be going in and being like, okay, you know, let's have a relationship. And I'll leave the floor at that.
I'm reading a really beautiful book right now called The Garden Awakening. And just the forward made me weep. And Anasara was like, what are you reading? But the woman who wrote the book talks about how she was this professional gardener, you know, for very rich people for a long time. And she would make these beautiful gardens that had flow and, you know, that she loved and had energy, but she was passing them off to people who largely weren't connected to them and were not stewarding them. And she started to realize she was not doing right by the land, that she was not in alignment with it. And her books now talk about basically, I think kind of what you were saying, which is about how do we work with nature to allow nature to be what she wants to be. And we help steward and facilitate that even, you know, into even greater depth and beauty.
I think that's really speaking to we right there. There's got to be some modality of putting in your requests to nature, saying, you know, like for instance, I would like to cultivate corn this season in this, you know, general area here where I reside. You know, where does Mother Nature, you know, feel like that would be the best place? You know, and it's like you're got to somehow like put out the initial request that you'd like to collaborate and on what specific things. Otherwise, how do you even get the ball of yarn rolling? Go ahead. I yield the floor. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say when I was listening to Marcia speaking, it just reminded me of when I was reading the first chapter in the lineage of the codes of light. I think it was the first chapter where it was the golden age, and they were able to know what the plants liked, what they didn't like. So she was arranging her garden so that all the plants were happy. And she had a beautiful garden, and that just spoke to me so much, because I'm like, yeah, that's how we should be connected to nature. And we used to do this so effortlessly, and now it looks like we're getting back to it. But yeah, it was really cool reading that chapter, because it was just super amazing, all the things they did to work with nature.
Absolutely. And how respectful and co-creative they were in the process. It wasn't this domineering, just, you know, hacking limbs off because, you know, you don't want it looking a certain way in your property type thing.
Go ahead, Heather.
Okay, so this one I actually would love to know, Marcia, if you have any insight or if you hear anything from Spirit regarding this. So a number of years ago, my mom got her hands on this really wacky book, and I don't remember what it was. It was written as fiction. I'll have to ask her what exactly it was called, but it's about this woman who was feral, and she, I think as a young girl, was in the forest and then left there, and she sort of became this fairy woman who just lived with nature, with the animals and the trees and such. And that she talked about this relationship that happens when the animals are munching on leaves and eating it with their mouth as opposed to picking with their fingers and then eating. I hope that made sense the way I said that. Not that animals have fingers other than us, but she was talking about how there's your saliva, as you're chewing on leaves that are still on the plant, can give information to the plant. And there's no science that I've found to back this up, but it felt so true to me that I actually grew a little stevia plant. And Liam and I, when he was little, used to crawl out in the garden and eat off the plant, just little nibbles like bunny rabbits. And according to her, the plant will actually change and be like, oh, okay, I understand what this animal needs from me. And it would even have like a chemical shift as far as potentially filling in nutritious or nutrient or vibrational changes that would be beneficial to the animal eating from it. And she also recommended, if you're going to plant a seed, to put it in your mouth and hold it in your mouth so that it could have some sort of download of your DNA. If any of that makes sense, I'll yield the floor.
Spirit's giving a big resounding yes to everything that you just said.
That's really cool. I want it to be true. It felt true to me.